Good evening and welcome to Wigtown Book Festival. We're very happy to have you joining us wherever you are in the world right now. I am Andres Nicholas Orderica. I'm a writer and educator based in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I will be your chair tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event with writer Dean Atta, author of The Black Flamingo. Hello, Dean.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you, especially.
Yes, thank you. No, my honor. So for the audience, I'm just going to give them a rundown of what the event will be like and do some housekeeping. So tonight's event is an hour long. I will shortly formally introduce Dean, and then he will share a reading with us. And afterwards, we'll move on to some questions between Dean and I before ending the event with a Q&A with you, the audience. And just to note, throughout the event, you can share your questions for Dean, and that can be done either on the website, Wigtown's website, or if you're watching the live stream on YouTube, you can also share within the chat area on the video player. So now that that is out of the way, on to our formal introductions. Dean Atta was named as one of the most influential LGBT people in the UK by The Independent on Sunday. His debut poetry collection was shortlisted for the Polari First Book Prize. He has a philosophy and English BA from the University of Sussex and a writer-teacher MA from Goldsmiths, University of London. His debut novel, The Black Flamingo, was awarded the 2020 Stonewall Book Award and shortlisted for the CILIP Carnegie Medal YA Book Prize and the Jhalak Prize. Dean is based in Glasgow and is co-director of the Scottish BAME Writers Network.
Yay.
Yay! And that's how we also know each other.
We know each other from so many places.
Many things. We met
Yeah.
many moons ago, but now we are
Funny.
happily team members and writers just sharing wonderful spaces within Scotland. But yeah, so you are shortly going to be sharing, I think, three excerpts from your wonderful novel. So yeah, we'll just start with that.
Okay, well, thank you for that lovely intro, and thank you, Wigtown, for having me. Thanks everyone who's watching live and everyone who watches this in the future. I'm really delighted to be joining you tonight from my flat in Glasgow. And yeah, this book, The Black Flamingo, is actually set down south in London and Brighton. And the character Michael is a mixed race gay boy who, through the book, he comes out as gay at school. He also goes to university and finds a passion for drag performance. But the moment I'm going to share with you first is when he's visiting his family in Cyprus. So he's got family from Cyprus and Jamaica, and he's visiting his family in Cyprus, and there's a sighting of a black flamingo. And this was the kind of genesis of the book. This is where I started writing it. Grandad goes back inside. He draws my attention to the news. The story, a black flamingo has landed on the island. An expert on screen explaining it is the opposite of an albino. Too much melanin, he says. Camera pans the salt lake full of pink, but my eye is drawn to that one black body in the flamboyance. The following evening, my beach towel and shorts dry on the balcony. Couples on mopeds ride past the house. Dogs walk humans before dinner. Grandad coughs violently, then lights another cigarette. Grandma calls us in to eat. The black flamingo is on the news again. I pick the dining chair facing the TV. Grandad asks, why does it matter if he's black? Adding, the other flamingos don't care. And I am certain what he's saying is, I love you. So that's where I started with writing the book, and decided to kind of expand out on various experiences that Michael would have. So this is a novel in verse, and so there's many parts to it, and they're kind of like individual poems, but they come together to tell the story. And the next part is Michael going to university. His uncle, his Jamaican uncle, is driving him there. Uncle B drives me and my stuff to university. He tells me how proud he is, asks what I'm excited about and what I'm nervous about. I don't tell him I'm excited and nervous about meeting guys, having sex, maybe a relationship. I tell him I'm excited to have my freedom. We're 5 minutes from our destination, according to his sat-nav, and we hear sirens and see flashing lights. It's the police behind us. My uncle pulls over, I think at first to let them pass, but I soon realize that they are pulling us over. They ask my uncle if this is his car, to see his license, where we are going. They tell him it's a very nice car, ask him what he does for a living. My usually polite uncle is abrupt with the police, asks them what business they have stopping him. Was he speeding? Was there a problem with one of his lights? Did he fit the description of a suspect they're looking for? The police say we can be on our way and to have a nice day. They get back in their car and drive away. Are you okay? I ask. Uncle B begins. There's always something. No matter how hard you work, no matter how well you do, how successful or respectable, there's always something that will remind you you shouldn't get too comfortable. I always thought education and money was going to earn me respect, but a successful Black man is a threat. Pulling me over for driving a nice car. This isn't what I wanted for your moving day, but this is what it's like to be Black in this country or anywhere in the world. They interrupt our joy, our history, our progress. They know they can't stop us unless they kill us, but they can't kill us all. So you're living your life and suddenly interrupted by white fear or suspicion. They fear sharing anything. Our success is a threat. I've never heard my uncle speak in these terms of them and us. I've never thought in these terms until today. So, as well as narrating the story for you, Michael also has personal poems that he writes in his notebook, and you get to read those poems, and they actually come on lined paper, so you can see they're the notebook poems. So this one is called I Come From. I come from shepherd's pie and Sunday roast, jerk chicken and stuffed vine leaves. I come from traveling through my taste buds, but loving where I live. I come from a home that some would call broken. I come from DIY that never got done. I come from waiting by the phone for him to call. I come from waving the white flag to loneliness. I come from the rainbow flag and the Union Jack. I come from a British passport and an ever-ready suitcase. I come from jet fuel and fresh coconut water. I come from crossing oceans to find myself. I come from deep issues and shallow solutions. I come from a limited vocabulary, but an unrestricted imagination. I come from a decent education and a marvelous mother. I come from being given permission to dream, but choosing to wake up instead. I come from wherever I lay my head. I come from unanswered questions and unread books, unnoticed effort and undelivered apologies and thanks. I come from who I trust and who I have left. I come from last year, and I don't notice how I've changed. I come from looking in the mirror and looking online to find myself. I come from stories, myths, legends, and folk tales. I come from lullabies and pop songs, hip hop and poetry. I come from griots, grandmothers, and her storytellers. I come from published words and strangers' smiles. I come from my own pen, but I see people torn apart like paper, each a story or a poem that never made it into a book. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. What wonderful readings, and what a joy to hear it from the author himself. And I'm so glad that you chose to read one of Michael's poems, and that you pointed that out to our wonderful viewers, because I think one of my favorite things, I mean, there are many things to love about the novel, but from sort of a design and formatting point of view is, yeah, I don't know how well it will look on camera, but you can see on this page, you can see the faint lines of one of, oh no, that is actually, I'm reading this one. This is a letter from Rowan to Michael, but just how we get to see the different forms. And I guess that will lead into my first question. You acknowledge that The Black Flamingo is a verse novel, and so many of the poems feel like they can easily stand on their own, that I might come across them in, a literary magazine, or that they might, it could be repackaged as a collection of poems. But they're so rich and cohesive when they're read together in the story they build. And I just wanted to first ask you, what motivated you to use poetic verse to tell Michael's story?
Well, I think YA is a really kind of broad church, and it allows for a lot of freedom in the way you present a book and a story. I've seen many YA books that include news reports, like made up news reports for the story, or diary entries, or things like that. So I already knew YA was a space in which you could be free to kind of like present things in different ways. But personally, I'm a poet, so poetry was going to be the way I wanted to tell a story. So that was kind of the reason why it's a novel in verse, because I don't know that I would have wanted to tell the story in prose. I think for me, writing it in poetry means I get straight to the heart of the matter. I kept it all first person, so you only hear other people when they are talking to Michael. So that kind of quote of Uncle B's speech there, that's being said directly to Michael, or like the bit you pointed out, the letter that Michael receives from Rowan, because Rowan gets a letter from Michael. I won't say what the letters are about, but there's some letter exchanging that goes on in high school. The book also features text messages and messages Michael writes in his notebook, and messages he writes on his phone when he goes to the toilet in a club, and he kind of like has a moment of inspiration and wants to write a poem straight away. So I wanted to kind of bring an urgency and an immediacy to the way I presented the story. So it's either, first person Michael telling you, or, him reflecting in his notebook really urgently, so a lot of the poems, when they're being written. So one of them, I think he writes in the bar, another one he writes on Brighton Beach when he's kind of like reflecting on some stuff that's recently happened. And so, yeah, it was really fun to play with the form and to kind of tackle it in short bursts, because I think that's how I work best as a poet. I don't want to sit at the desk for a long time. I want to like do an hour or two and then walk away and then come back and then do a different bit. I kind of keep it moving when I'm writing, and then when I'm editing I spend longer with the kind of moving things about, making it make sense. But I just kind of like blurt bits out, and so poetry in short form really suits that.
Yeah, and I'm like really glad that you also pointed out the various ways that he communicates with the other characters around him, because to me, it really brought that character to life. I believed that he was his age and living sort of in the time period that he's living in, and that, is not just how sort of teenagers and young people communicate, but many of us do. But that felt very true and authentic, and
Yeah.
the use even of emojis, and
The
I
emojis, let me tell you, like up until about a week before it went to print, we didn't have permission to use emojis. So there was a version of the book without emojis, whilst they were trying to sort out the rights to use emojis, because it's actually quite tricky to get permission to use them. So they were sourcing different versions of the emojis to get the right one that would give us permission in time to print it in the book. Otherwise, yeah, you would have had to have a description of the emojis, like so what their names are. So like laughing with tears of joy, or rolling on the floor laughing, which was actually fun to figure out because I've recorded the audiobook. So for that, I have to describe what the emojis are, because you can't see them in audio. So I actually
mm,
give all the emojis their kind of given names. So it's kind of cool. And yeah, doing the audiobook was another way, I think, of connecting to people who may not pick up a book, a printed book. Because for me, I didn't read a lot, but I really, when I was younger, but I really enjoyed audiobooks and, watching poetry on YouTube, and, the spoken word in general was my way of receiving stories.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I'm so glad though that the emojis got signed off, because they're just some really brilliant points within those text messages where they're being used, where there's just lines where it is just emojis, but it
Mm-hmm.
really communicates what the characters are sort of feeling
Yeah.
um, in that moment. Um, yeah, and it just again, it's just to me so masterfully formatted. So if you are a design geek, then this is, for the story alone, but also for just how beautiful it is to read.
Well, we have to
Um,
thank Alice Duggan for the design, and Anshika Kalors for the illustrations. So thank you to them, and obviously my editor Polly Lau Grant. But like, yeah, it was a real team effort. A book, isn't just the author. There's so many
Hmm.
people that come around you to make it happen and make it beautiful. Like, I think what I love about this book is it's a beautiful artifact as well as
Hmm.
the story within it. Like, there's so much around it, and that I really appreciate because you can't do that on your own.
Yeah, yes, totally. And I think, yeah, there's elements of that really come across even through the character of Michael, where he acknowledges sort of those that came before him and helped him, you know, and we'll get to sort of that journey by the end. But yes, it's good for me to remember to circle back. Um, so for my next question, um, as a reader, we get to go along a journey with Michael where we first meet him at age 7. We kind of hear him retell the story of his birth, but we primarily meet the character of Michael at age 7. And then we follow him on through to his first year at university. So roughly, we're with him for almost 10 years or so, and we get to see him at various pivotal points of his adolescence and his childhood and early adulthood as he's exploring his sense of self and his sexuality. And I just wanted to know, it's a two-part question. Did you always plan to fit in 10 plus years of Michael's life in the novel? And secondly, was it important for you to give the story that space, especially for young readers? You know, seeing as how he's a character that really, I don't want to say confronts, but really has to make sense of his, multiple identities and sort of intersections.
Mm. So the first draft of the book was written with Michael as a teenager the whole time, and the childhood parts were like flashbacks. Basically, he remembers them, and so they were written in the past tense. But my wonderful editor was like, "Let's do it all in the present tense and put it in a chronological order, and then we can see him grow up." And once we did that, it worked, and I was like, "That's great." So we kept that. And in terms of what you wanted to see on the journey, I think, yeah, what was interesting for me was like knowing that, when he gets to his teens, he's learned so much about himself, about the world, about his mother and his friends, and I think he has a greater appreciation of kind of like, I don't know, the intersections, the intricacies of his identity. But when he's young, he's just got very singular goals. Like when you meet him at the beginning of the book, he just wants a Barbie doll. That's his sole motivation, But by the end of the book, I like to say he is the Barbie doll. But what I mean by that is that he's embraced so much about himself, his femininity, his kind of like sensuality, his playfulness, his heritage, both, queer lineage and ethnic heritage. And it all comes into his performance as the Black Flamingo when he puts on heels and makeup and feathers. And I think, yeah, that journey is really interesting for me to take him on, because I knew what I was picking up along the way that we're going to build into that final performance. And the performance is something I wrote quite early on because I knew that's what I wanted to get to. And then it was about, I had that sighting of the flamingo, I had the performance, and then it was kind of like everything else kind of got written afterwards. Just kind of thinking, what's the journey a boy goes on to go from spotting a flamingo to then becoming a flamingo on stage? So, what does he pick up along the way? And yeah, like I said, the early childhood stuff was just going to be flashbacks to kind of bring the Barbie reference in and bring some other references in. But actually, it worked to put it chronological and meet him really young.
Definitely. And I think one thing that really made that so evocative and especially makes that ending work so well is the fact that it's written as a verse novel and you employ a lot of poetic techniques like mirroring and repetition and motif, and there are certain sort of lines that I think even are introduced in sort of earlier poems and come up in it, and I think in a way that is the journey of a person. You sort of have these certain manifestos or prayers or mantras, whatever they might be, and I think we get to see that journey of Michael and what are these things that are interests of him, um, and then and where that goes. And I think this does then lead into my next question, because in in that early bit we were talking about where all he wants is the Barbie doll, um, and but like another element of what he really likes, or another thing that he really likes, is the Ninja Turtles, and or that's sort of what is gifted to him a lot. And as he gets older, or a bit older, he has this really beautiful line where or poem where he's talking about turtles. And so it's nice that we get to see that as like a very playful little boy, and like Ninja Turtles, and them as sort of action figures. And I remember watching the Ninja Turtles, and all they do is fight crime and eat pizza. That's not all they do. But then he has this really deep moment where he talks about the actual biology of a turtle, and how a turtle is able to build its own home, that it literally grows the home, but it also has to be careful because it carries its home with it. And there's the danger that if it were injured, that means their home can be broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask you to sort of speak about the different homes that Michael belongs to. And then also, you know, because I think a big part of that runs to the beginning of the novel is him reconciling the fact that he comes from a single family, or a single parent home, and sort of how that's interpreted through sort of the other relationships of parental figures he sees, um, and this idea that just the homes that he belongs to, and he talks about it a lot, and how we learn of his father's side of the family, and how really for him those family member, or that family, is really represented by his uncle first and foremost, and then his grandmother, and his father is almost kind of like a shadow in the corner. So I'm really just interested in that exploration of those sorts of family types through a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and if you've sort of have you ever come across that before in a YA novel?
Um, what different families
Well,
represent?
that I think that very honest and authentic portrayal, but also allowing a character like Michael through even at that age to kind of work through that understanding of his self and what
Yeah.
home
I mean,
might
I
mean.
think a lot of YA does this, but also a lot of middle grade does this. So that's like books for 8 to 12 year olds as well. So, if you separated out that bit of the Black Flamingo, that could have been middle grade. And then, once he's a teenager, that would be YA. But luckily, because the majority of the book is Michael as a teenager, it is a YA book. But I think, like I said earlier, the boundaries of YA are kind of really blurry, and you can do a lot of different things with it. But I think the different homes that Michael kind of belongs to, it's a journey. Obviously, like you said, he grows up with his mum in a single parent family, but there is the great support of his uncle and his grandma, and then also when they go to Cyprus, he kind of reckons with what the home could be for him there, because obviously he stands out being black in a kind of white family, and so that's something that he kind of finds challenging, and is referred to as the black one, literally in Greek, to Mavra. So like that is something that he kind of doesn't know if that's meant in any particular way or not. But then when he sees the flamingo, that feels like a sign to him that this is a place for him. Cyprus is part of him, because that flamingo represents something he sees of himself. And then obviously the biggest move, and it's quite timely with all the students now, is him moving to university and trying to find a home there, living with flatmates that don't know what his food is and asking him what's ackee like, or like they actually don't seem to know how to cook, and he's the only one that uses the kitchen. But also finding on university campus, being able to go to all the clubs and societies, and it's not really your flatmates necessarily that become your kind of main family. Some people are lucky and have great flatmates at university, but some people, you have to go to clubs and societies, or you meet people in your lectures and seminars, and they become your university family. So he goes through that process by going to the LGBT society, going to the drag society, and that's where he really finds himself. You know, he also goes to the African Caribbean Society, but he doesn't feel Black enough. And he also goes to the Hellenic Society, but he doesn't feel Greek enough. You know, his kind of Greek and Cypriot identity doesn't really feel like he fully owns it because he can't speak the language. But language is a way I also kind of explore home. You know, so I use some Greek and I use some Jamaican patois in there, you know, for Michael to kind of hear it. He doesn't necessarily speak it, but for me as the author writing it was really great because I felt like I was representing parts of cultures because I kind of share that heritage, you know, that Michael has. I've got Greek Cypriot and Jamaican family. So for me, it was really wonderful. And, you know, I knew the book would kind of resonate with Black and queer people, but what was really lovely was that how many Cypriot people and Greek people have read the book and said that they haven't seen, you know, Greek and Cypriot culture represented in many books in English, and especially a queer experience. And so lots of queer Cypriots have been reaching out, which has been really wonderful because I didn't necessarily know that, not that they were out there, but that they would find this book.
Yeah. Well, I think one of just a profound section of it for me in particular, and just my experience as being from a Mexican immigrant family. You know, I grew up speaking Spanish, but my Spanish is at times rusty. So what I really love were those moments when Michael was in Cyprus and he was with his sister as well and his best friend Daisy, and sort of the how reliant he was on his mother to be an interpreter, and what that experience is like when you share you know, a bloodline with a family member and they're in your grandparents and you love your grandparents, but how so much of connection is really weighted on some form of communication, and how, you know, Michael can catch words here and there, but I think, you know, you in one of the excerpts that you read at the beginning is that beautiful moment between him and his grandfather, and you know, um, about the Black Flamingo, and they've been watching it for a few days on the news, and his grandfather, you know, it's like you said, saying, why is it such a big deal? Like the other flamingos will still love him, and he interprets that as a form of I love you. Um, and then it made when I read this novel for going through it like the second time, and I was trying to formulate my questions, that excerpt really stuck out to me as a really beautiful dialogue with early on in the novel when Michael comes home after his sister's just born, and someone points out to him that, you know, you guys have the same mother, but you have different dads, so she's only your half sister. And then he's reconciling with the fact that he's of mixed heritage, and his mother has this really brilliant line, or lines within that poem itself, where she says, "You are born in Britain, you need to make space for what British means." And I just thought it was really beautiful to see both of those sides at very distinct points, you know, when he is about 7 or 8 and then as a teenager. And I guess I wanted to ask you about that intersectionality again, you know, is another, yeah, a question I think that is woven through all of the questions I have, but just this idea of his queerness and his mixed race identity, and that flamingos are so vibrant and camp looking creatures.
Yeah.
But what really kind of sticks out for him, it almost is like this enigmatic moment, is when he sees it as a black flamingo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, you know, when you were writing this novel, because it's for a YA audience, were there any bits where you questioned, where you felt like you had to hold back, or what you were able to present as for young adults, and not necessarily about what young people can handle, but I mean more so like the bureaucracy of going through the publishing world, you know, did you ever have any pushbacks of what you portray in Michael's exploration of his sexuality and his racial identity?
Um, No, and I think it was really liberating actually to write things through characters. Because in my poetry, I kind of have to say things for me as Dean. I could use persona and do character poems, but they won't always be received or read that way. So I kind of stick to only saying things in my poetry that I would say myself. Whereas in the Black Flamingo, these characters can conflict and can argue, with each other, like a Platonic dialogue. So I study philosophy, and I found the dialogues, that in philosophy were the most interesting things because it was two people reasoning out, any given argument, and you kind of know what which argument's going to win, but it's nice to kind of give a sense of some pushback within that conversation. That's kind of what I've done with some of the characters that challenge Michael or Michael is challenged by. There's a point I'm trying to make, but I play out both sides of the argument and I let the reader decide, where they stand. And so I think with that, it's almost like it's terrible kind of comparison to make to my own novel, but like, the way the BBC always have to have a balanced representation of like different sides of the argument. So, I have put racist voices in there and I have put homophobic voices in there, but to knock them down. And so that was why I kind of like have used some of these kind of things that we hear, people of color and queer people hear often. I had to put them in there so I can like show them for how ridiculous and ignorant they are. And so that was really fun. And then no, there was no pushback. There were things where we discussed how far I wanted to go, because my name's on it at the end of the day, and so I don't want to put anything overly sexual in a YA market, and I don't want to put anything that I would want to like have to explain, if it's not self-explanatory, if it doesn't stand alone, because I was also aware any given page could be taken in isolation, especially because they are poems. So, anything could be shared on Instagram, anything could be shared on Twitter. And so I don't want anything in my book that could be taken out of context to look a certain way for someone else's agenda. So I was very aware of that. And I think it's sad that we have to be aware of that, but this is the day and age we live in. And this is the kind of thing that people do, and I've seen it done with like the film that's on Netflix at the moment called Cuties. That is a film that is kind of discussing this over sexualization of female bodies and like the attractiveness that has for some young girls. And I think it is a strong critique against sexualization, but you can take some clips of it and it can look like the director has sexualized these girls. But when you see the whole film, that's not the case at all. But I was already, aware when I was writing my book that I didn't want to allow anyone to use my book for some ulterior agenda. So I was very careful. And my editor was obviously very careful. And so, yeah, I think it's sad we have to, clearly that sounds like I've self-censored in some ways, but actually I've just made this book like bulletproof.
No, but like, and it's interesting to hear that because I think what is on the page is so authentic and so everything seems to serve the story of Michael. But I also think, for me as an older reader, I think I had to sort of get over my bias of what momentarily when I read stuff and think, oh my gosh, oh, this is for a young person. But then remembering we went through that,
Exactly.
and especially, you know, in the current day and age, just sort of access to things that you're able to have that, I didn't have when I was Michael's age, like
Mhm.
16 plus years ago.
Mhm.
But, the idea that he tries to have sort of his first sexual relationship and he gets on Grinder, and won't give anything away, but it doesn't fully happen,
Yeah.
much to his after the fact, his gratefulness that things stop.
Mm.
But that felt really to me like I didn't feel like it was pushing boundaries. It felt like it was allowing a character to go through what was being portrayed on the page, which is this
Mhm.
exploration of sexuality at 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
And to me, it made sense. It made sense, and I never felt like a character, the character of Michael was being put in sort of sensationalized scenarios.
Yeah, these are scenarios, these are things that happen. There's an authenticity in there because, we can recognize those experiences do happen. And also, I think there's no real issue with putting, especially the fact that he goes on Grinder, he has an experience, he decides that Grinder isn't for him. That's quite a clear, kind of almost moral tale there. Whereas what was more interesting for me anyway was the later experience when it's actually a great experience. It's fully consensual, and it surprises him because it's a guy he wonders, assumes might be straight, but then things go his way, and but then that guy turns out or wants to say that he is straight, and then it's that kind of like pushback of like, what I experienced is now kind of being invalidated by someone saying that this is not for them. And so that exploration was more complicated, and I found that more interesting to write, and the kind of the affirmative consent of that interaction. He's like, can I kiss you? Can I touch you there? Do you have a condom? Like that kind of stuff being really explicit. And people have said to me, oh, like, I didn't realize you could ask those questions so frankly in a sexual encounter. And it's like, well, good. I'm modeling it in this book because, these are important questions to ask. And I think it's, for me, that was what I was excited about putting across, like a situation where everyone, gives really clear consent, even though, I won't say too much about what goes on. I kind of already have, but I was really, really excited about writing something that had really clear consent, because I think so many times it's really ambiguous when we write about sex. And so I wanted to just show that you can have really clear consensual sexual relations.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is, and you brought it up in an earlier answer of yours, this idea of sort of showing like these teachable moments, or allowing, these dueling dialogues. And and I think that was a really sort of brilliantly profound moment, where we were getting to see consent talked about in that way. But then I think of another moment which I really found like kind of electrifying in a way, is when Michael is in university and he goes out with his friend Lenny, who's also black, and a girl named Sienna. And they're in the club and they're talking about sort of like interest, like what's your type. And sort of off the cuff, Michael says that he's not really into black guys. And then Sienna says, oh, she's totally into black guys. And Lenny has to like sit there, and he has like this beautiful moment where it's his own poem that we're hearing it through from his voice. And talking about how both sides of that are actually sort of racist. And for Michael, even as a young black man and a mixed race young man, having for him, he realizes, oh, actually that wasn't right of me to say that.
Yeah.
um and I thought, that you were able to sort of talk about fetishization and microaggressions, but in such a way that felt authentic. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to try to teach young people this thing. I'm going to have it play out how it happens all the time in life.
Yeah, and I think, I wanted readers to root for Michael, but I didn't want him to be perfect and I didn't want him to be a victim. And so sometimes he makes the mistakes and sometimes he is the one that kind of has to be told off. And
Mm.
I'm really glad, that we find, I found the right moments for that to happen in a way that felt authentic. And so that's why it was really great for me to write, all these characters interjecting with their monologues, so their poems could shine through. And so Lenny's, a dark-skinned black man talking about how he sees the situation of fetishization and racism. And, I couldn't have written that from Michael's point of view because he doesn't have that insight. So that's why it was great to be able to write. But I've also got, in the book, a white guy talking about like growing up not in London and in a smaller community where, you know, being gay isn't really an option and going to university is enough to get you bullied. Like, so I've got all these other voices that get to teach Michael stuff about themselves and himself, you know, and I think that that's a mutual learning going on, I think, for most of the characters in the book. But I was really happy for Michael to be flawed, to make mistakes, to reflect upon them, to make amends. And that was, you know, a real important part of the journey, you know, because Michael gets forgiven and he has to forgive people too. And I think that's really important. You know, forgiveness is something I really believe in, but, you know, more for the self than the other person, actually. But I wanted to show that in this book, you know, and I know there'll be differing opinions about how much you should be willing to forgive people, but I don't think anyone does anything so horrendous to Michael that he can't forgive them. So, you know, because I was really wanted to shy away from massive trauma. You know, I was microaggressions, you know, I could deal with, but I didn't want to necessarily go into places that were, you know, overly triggering and overly traumatizing for readers. However, you know, I've been told this book does need a ton of trigger warnings because lots of things do happen, you know, but for me, some of the incidents, you know, are fairly mild to what, you know, I might have experienced or what I know my friends have experienced. So, you know, yeah, maybe one day I'll write that book and you'll see how bad it can be to be Black and gay.
Well, but it's interesting that you talk about the idea of forgiveness because I think one of the really moving moments is when in university, sort of midway through first year, Daisy and Michael are able to make up, and you know this and getting to see Daisy's revelation, and it's another sort of very serious topic, but you allow to expand in a really authentic way this notion of internalized homophobia, and Daisy, um, you know, while she's away at university, she comes out and she meets a girlfriend, and she's able to explain what she's learned to Michael through her girlfriend, who's helped sort of the moment where their best friendship kind of becomes really fractured is this moment where Michael kind of reads her as being really homophobic, and it happens really quickly. And I think what's nice is you talk about you don't want you purposely didn't want Michael to be a perfect character because I remember thinking in that moment, I think Daisy was in the wrong, but I think Michael was really sort of agitated by it and then was very finite in kind of ending it. So to be able to then have them reunite
Mm,
in that context and
mm,
what they've learned in their first few months at university and how they've both grown was like just a really brilliant moment um, of forgiveness.
mm. Yeah, I think Daisy was a really fun character to write. So Daisy is Michael's best friend at school, and you know she's pretty strong-minded, and very loyal friend, but also very problematic. Like she's got a bit of internalized racism and homophobia going on, and so Michael kind of has to deal with this for quite a while. And also, he's a bit jealous because his mother really embraces Daisy to the extent that she comes on a family holiday with them, you know, not at Michael's invitation, but at Michael's mother's invitation. So he's found, you know, a best friend that's almost become a bit too close to his family. And I think he kind of uses moving to university as an opportunity to just get rid of her. Like, and so, you know, he's kind of like, you know, one of those people that's like, no bad vibes. Like, I think he's gone down that route. And so he's just like, I can't deal with it. I'll make new friends. But actually, she comes back and is fully redeemed. And, you know, I think everyone that reads the book roots for Daisy to come back into Michael's life because, you know, I feel like I wrote a really rounded character. And even though, you know, she's problematic, you see a lot of amazing qualities about her and the relationship that they share. So yeah, Daisy was really fun to write, and yeah, I just really like, again, problematic, not a perfect character, but definitely redeemable, and someone that, you know, people enjoyed reading and I loved writing.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved her in I mean, throughout, but just when they first meet, she's just such an interesting character, and it's kind of an enigma for Michael, who he's just drawn to, even though she's not really giving him a lot at the beginning. But then to see that friendship really blossom, and I think, I think like the rest of your readers, I am really glad that she was brought back because I think she was really pivotal for him and really helped him in that shift from his first secondary school to the one that he finally stays at on before he then goes off into university. We are getting some audience questions through, so I'm going to ask you my last question. Um, which is about the end of your novel. And we kind of spoke about this offline a bit, so we agreed that you will do a reading for us after this question. But I was really intrigued in the second reading. I was sort of saying to you when we were talking a bit before it started how I forgot that your novel ended with an epilogue. And this epilogue is really just this brilliant manifesto. It's entitled How to Come Out as Gay, and it's very subversive in that you tackle all of these stereotypes of the coming out process and what society expects of us as queer people, but then also I think sort of for within the queer community what we expect of each other and who gets to wear that badge, who's done enough to earn it. Um, and I just wanted to know why you decided to end the novel with that poem. And I use the word, but do you see it as like a manifesto for not just young LGBTQIA people, but sort of anyone within the community? Um, and what was your hope for your reader to take away from that poem?
I mean, that poem is like definitely a manifesto, but it was me talking to my younger self. Like, I definitely see the Black Flamingo as a whole as a gift to my younger self. Like, I would have loved to have it, and so I hope people that kind of share a bit of my identity might benefit from it. But I hope everyone benefits from it, and I think coming out takes many shapes and forms, and so I don't necessarily think there's one way to do it. And I think this poem was just my way of reminding myself and others that it's not a kind of a simple process, and it's an ongoing thing. And yeah, it's that poem in particular. I wrote, it's gone in the Black Flamingo, but I also wrote it kind of separate to the Black Flamingo. So I wrote it for an anthology called Proud, which was edited by Juno Dawson and published by Stripes. And then it kind of had to go in the Black Flamingo because I was just like, it speaks so much to this teenage audience, and I think it fits perfectly as the epilogue. So that's why it's not within the story itself. It kind of follows, and it's like almost me as the author coming in to give some advice. You could read it as Michael's words, or you could read it as Dean's words, and that there's a big crossover there at that point anyway, because I think the kind of 19-year-old Michael kind of by that point, I think he shares a lot of things with me. The younger Michael kind of is kind of different, but the older Michael kind of has a lot of kind of similarities with me, I think. So I think, yeah, that poem, like I've said, yeah, is a gift to my younger self and to anyone that's kind of going through that coming out process at whatever stage they're at.
Perfect. And now we get to hear it from you yourself.
Yeah. Okay. This is How to Come Out as Gay. Don't. Don't come out unless you want to. Don't come out for anyone else's sake. Don't come out because you think society expects you to. Come out for yourself. Come out to yourself. Shout, sing it, softly stutter. Correct those who say they knew before you did. That's not how sexuality works. It's yours to define. Being effeminate doesn't make you gay. Being sensitive doesn't make you gay. Being gay makes you gay. Be a bit gay. Be very gay. Be the glitter that shows up in unexpected places. Be typing on WhatsApp, but leave them waiting. Throw a party for yourself, but don't invite anyone else. Invite everyone to your party, but show up late or not at all. If you're unhappy in the closet, but afraid of what's outside, Leave the door ajar and call out. If you're happy in the closet for the time being, play dress up until you find the right outfit. Don't worry. It's okay to say you're gay and later exchange it for something else that suits you, fits, feels better. Watch movies that make it seem a little less scary. Beautiful Thing, Moonlight. Be Southeast London Council Estate, a daytime dance floor, his head resting on your shoulder. Be South Beach, Miami, night of water and fire, your head resting on his shoulder. Be the fabric of his shirt, the muscles in his shoulder, your shoulder. Be the bricks, be the sand, be the river, be the ocean. Remember, your life is not a movie. Accept you'll be coming out for your whole life. Accept advice from people and sources you trust. If your mother warned you about HIV within minutes of you coming out, try to understand that she loves you and is afraid. If you come out at 15, this is not a badge of honor. It doesn't matter what age you come out. Be a beautiful thing. Be the moonlight too. Remember, you have the right to be proud. Remember, you have the right to be you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Um, yeah, I think manifesto is the word to use. It just feels such a brilliant call to arms. But also I think really beautifully inclusive of who gets to be a part of that narrative and validating, that it doesn't have to be just one given way. So I'm so glad that we got to hear that from you. We have a question from Aggie from Isla, sort of something you just alluded to, but she wants to know, Dean, do you see any of yourself in Michael's story? So you were saying sort of 17, 18, 19. So I guess if you want to speak about that, but then also I'm interested, do you see any of yourself in his younger self?
Yeah, I mean, I drew from some of my own experiences for the book. So I definitely see a lot of myself in this, but I couldn't get too attached to my actual experience because that might not make the best story. So, what I was working with was some of my own experiences, some research, talking to friends, talking to young people, lots of reading and watching and kind of reflecting and then thinking about, what's the journey, the best journey for this character to get to this performance, because Michael does his performance at 19. I didn't do drag until I was 30 something. So like I took a longer time to get there. So for me, that wouldn't have been YA if you got a book about a 30-year-old man doing drag for the first time. It'd be a good book, but like it wouldn't be a YA book. So you kind of had to speed him along in his self-discovery, and that's probably more realistic for a young person today. But I think for a person of my age or older, that a lot of realizations come later in life because I didn't have school being able to give me LGBT books. We had Section 28 across the whole of the UK, which meant that local authorities and schools couldn't talk about, homosexuality in a positive way in schools. So that restricted, what books they could do, use, and how supportive they could be of gay students as well. So I didn't have the opportunities that Michael had. I didn't have a teacher wearing rainbow laces like Michael does. I didn't have that kind of affirmative and positive representation in the media to the extent that we have today. And so I think obviously there's also terrible media at the moment, but it wasn't as fiercely debated because it wasn't as visible, and so it felt like you weren't able to see yourself, and so that's why it was important to put some of my experiences in a book, because I'd never seen my experiences in a book, but I didn't want to do it at this stage as anything like a memoir. I wanted to do it as a work of fiction, and I wanted to do YA because I think young people most urgently need these stories, and so that's why I chose to write for that audience. Yeah.
Great. And we have another question following on from that. How did you decide how much of yourself to share or let become part of Michael?
I was in therapy alongside writing the book, so I sought some advice, or at least talked it through with my therapist, and he was very good. He was it's quite an alternative kind of therapist. So like sometimes he'd be like, he'd give me homework and he'd be like, go away and read this, or go and watch this John Waters film, or like, so I remember watching Pink Flamingos, the movie, to kind of get some inspiration. But yeah, I kind of just talked about how comfortable or uncomfortable I felt about, bits that were based on my life, and how much I wanted to leave those in, or take them out. And but I kind of just went with the process of like, what's going to be the best story. So if like the majority of the book is an invention, and so it was really good to like just be able to like say, okay, this is a thing that happened. Like there was a real black flamingo that I did see in Cyprus, and there is a time, when I did drag, but so much in between. It's just like, okay, how do we get there? So it was kind of that, about that, like how do you go on the best journey? And if there's anything of my experience that's useful, put it in. If I want to just put it in because that's what happened, if that doesn't make the story better, there's no point to keep it in there. So, and that's the great thing about having an editor. They'll be really brutal, and they don't care what was your life and what you made up. They just care about what was the best storytelling. And so that was the kind of joy of having someone else, an outside eye, who doesn't necessarily know what's real and what's made up, because then she can make really brutal kind of suggestions and cuts, and I can go and cry to my therapist that my editor said something that really happened wasn't believable. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we can fit in one more question. So okay, this is the one I want to end on. Um, Obviously, this event is part of the YA program at Wigtown, and your novel has been highly lauded for its exploration of queerness and race and just the many intersections of your character. And I want to know what excites you about contemporary YA fiction, writing within this genre, but also other writers, who excites you?
Oh wow, gosh, so many. Whew, um, gosh, okay, where do we go? I mean, I'm scared to mention someone for not mentioning someone else, but I mean, the people that really inspired me, and continue to, like, Jason Reynolds, and Elizabeth Acevedo, Kaysen Cullender, yeah, Tobley Smith. Like, there's so many really cool YA writers out there that are doing things that are really innovative. Like Nick Stone's books, Dear Martin and Dear Justice, really take a head-on look at, police brutality and racial injustice in the States. But then, we've got so many great YA authors here in the UK, like Alex Wheatle and Patrice Lawrence and Juno Dawson. And so, it's really, we're just spoiled. We're spoiled for choice in YA. And I recommend, the adults read YA because there's so much wisdom, there's so much freedom, there's so much free thinking going on in YA. And I think that's where it's at right now. So, I love it all, and I don't get enough time to read it all. But I've been reading some great stuff out of Scotland because I've been judging the new Writers Award for the Scottish Book Trust, and the YA category there was phenomenal. So that's something I'm currently, with the other judges, making a long list and getting ready to make some tough decisions. And but yeah, I just say look out for all this amazing YA that's going to be coming out of Scotland as well, because we've got some great writers here.
Perfect. You've heard it here first. Well, yeah, so I think we need to wrap up for tonight's event. So again, Dean, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful excerpts with us from the beautiful Black Flamingo. And like you said, I highly recommend it, not just to young readers, but adults. I think it's entirely insightful, and it's just really beautiful to be reminded that young people are smart, intelligent, they're worldly, they know what's going on, and just being able to see all that beautiful exploration through the character of Michael. So again, thank you. I'd like to also thank you, the audience, for joining us tonight, wherever you are in the world or where you're watching after the fact. A special thank you goes out to the Hollywood Trust, who have sponsored the Wigtown YA program this year. Um, I'd also personally like to say thank you to the staff and volunteers who have brought us to you through the brilliance that is live streaming and digital events. You can purchase a copy of Dean's book, The Black Flamingo, directly from the festival's online bookshop, where you can also donate online to support their efforts so that they continue to do their brilliant work for years on end. But yes, again, thank you to everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening or day or whatever. Bye.
Thanks, Andrea.